Hey everyone! Welcome to 8th grade history. We are going to be talking about the Korean War today, kind of continuing on our theme of post-World War II, what's happening to all of these nations, especially the new nations that are just starting to form after the war. So I'm so glad you can all join me today. But before we jump into the Korean War and all that that entails, we are going to read a little blurb just for fun from this goofy book called Oh Yikes, History's Grossest, Wackiest Moments. It's just some crazy stuff that I think you will find amusing. So here's our little blurb of the day about Attila and the Huns. How do you like your meat cooked? Broiled, grilled, medium rare? Well, here's a dandy Hun cooking idea that adds new meaning to the words rump roast. So, you take a slab of raw meat, get a horse, remove the saddle, put the meat on the horse where the saddle should go, then mount that sirloin and gallop around for 6 or 7 hours. When the meat is squishy from the pounding that your bottom has just provided, it'll be ready to eat. No need to cook. Just take a bite. After all, it's warm. Wow. Well, if you just had lunch or you're going to have lunch soon, sorry if I ruined your appetite. Pretty interesting way to cook meat. So instead of roasting it over the fire, these Huns, they had places to be. They had things to do, so they didn't have time to stop and cook, I guess. They would take raw meat and actually sit on it as if it was a saddle while they were riding around, and that would, in effect, cook it enough that they would eat it. So there we go. History, full of a lot of interesting details. So we're not going to be talking about the Huns today. We are going to be talking about Korea and what happened to the country of Korea after World War II ended. So we are going to start by reading the chapter. And if you have this book at home, we are going to be on page 367, I believe. Yes, page 367. And if you don't have the book, no worries. I've got it for us all right here, so let me pull it up. All right. Can everyone see this? Give me like a thumbs up, either using the reaction thing or your actual self. Yeah, perfect. Sweet. Thanks, guys. All right, I will start reading, and then if I call on you to read, just go ahead and unmute yourself to read a paragraph. All right. And actually, before we jump into the reading, I do want to give us a little bit of context. So we just had the Vietnam on Tuesday, where we learned they broke up into North and South. Earlier, we learned about China that became Taiwan and People's Republic of China with Mao. We learned about India, which became India and Pakistan. In the Middle East, we had Israel and Palestine. We had 2 competing governments in South Africa. So in Germany, became East and West Germany. So kind of the theme that we are noticing here is after World War II, it's not all kumbaya and peace. It's a lot of breaking apart, partitioning, and more wars starting immediately after. So keep all of that in mind as we read about Korea. I think you're going to recognize a lot of the same patterns. So in the years after World War II, the Soviet Union did its best to draw other countries into communism, while the United States grew more and more worried about this spreading change. During World War II, the United States had not been nearly as worried about the USSR. The possibility that Nazis might take control of Europe and that the Japanese soldiers might seize all of Asia had seemed much more threatening than the chance that the Soviets might convince other countries to become communist, right? Like one crazy battle at a time. But now Germany and Japan were defeated. The Soviet Union was claiming other countries for itself. The enormous country of China was communist under Mao. So was the northern half of Vietnam with Ho Chi Minh and the eastern half of Germany. The country of Korea would become the next place where communism and democracy collided. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the Japanese were forced to give up the land that they had seized during World War II. But what about Korea? Korea wasn't part of the original land of Japan. On the other hand, it had been a part of the Japanese Empire since 1910, well before World War I. Korea had been ruled by Japan for so long that it had no Korean government that could step up and run the country once the Japanese were gone. Korean officials would have to learn how to govern their own land. And hundreds of thousands of Japanese, many of whom had lived in Korea for 20 years or more, had to be moved back to Japan. All right, Paul, do you mind picking up and reading that next paragraph?
Sure. I actually don't. Hang on. How lucky am I? Hang on, my book doesn't have the page that I it's like the pages are messed up. I don't have the
That's okay. You can just read right off the screen then.
Oh, okay. Where would I start? Sorry.
The United States.
The United States and the Soviet Union decided to divide up the responsibility for slowly giving Korea back its independence. For convenience, they agreed to split the country in two. They drew an imaginary line right at the 38th parallel, the line of latitude that ran roughly across the middle of the country. North of the 38th parallel, Japanese troops would surrender to the Soviets. South of the 38th parallel, they would surrender to American troops. If this sounds arbitrary, it was. There wasn't anything particularly distinctive about the 38th parallel. In the United States, you can find the 38th parallel on a map if you draw the line from Charlottesville, Virginia on the East Coast, straight across to Stockton, California on the West Coast. This division was as arbitrary as saying that everyone above the line would speak one language and everyone below it another. No one had yet figured out that the partitioning of countries into smaller pieces didn't work very well.
Right. We are all starting to see that lesson. Absolutely. All right. Thank you. And you can mute yourself again.
All right.
Hudson, do you mind reading the next two paragraphs?
Sure.
Thanks.
And the Americans and the Soviets began to distrust each other very soon. The division of Korea was supposed to be temporary, but by 1948, neither the US nor the Soviet Union was willing to move out of Korea. Each was sure that the other country would immediately grab power. So instead of helping Korea to return to independence, the Soviet Union set up a communist government in the north of Korea, the People's Republic of North Korea. It was led by a Korean soldier named Kim Il-sung, who had served in the Soviet army.
Awesome, thank you. Dylan, can I have you read the next paragraph?
Where are we?
So we're starting down in the south.
Down in the south of Korea, a different country formed the President of the United States. Harry S. Truman appealed to the United Nations for help. Even though American soldiers were occupying the country, the United Nations agreed to give
South Korea.
South Korea a hand in holding its own elections. In August of 1948, the Southern Republic of Korea had its first elections. A Korean politician named Syngman Rhee became president. Rhee was friendly to the United States, and as a matter of fact, he had lived in America and had even earned a PhD at
Princeton.
Princeton University in New Jersey.
Thank you. Yeah, so we've got the communists are kind of starting to infiltrate in the north, and in the south, they're starting to be buddies with the United States and getting a democracy set up. But North and South Korea were both a mess. The president of the South hadn't exactly been appointed in a free and fair election. Syngman Rhee had been very willing to look the other way, while his supporters assassinated the politicians who might run against him. And in the north, the Soviet-led People's Republic of Korea was sending soldiers to silence anyone who objected to a communist government. Refugees from North Korea were flooding into South Korea. At the same time, South Koreans who sympathized with communism were trying to fight their way into North Korea. So kind of like what we read about in India with the Hindus fleeing to India and the Muslims fleeing to Pakistan and vice versa, getting mixed up. In June of 1950, 90,000 North Korean soldiers, given all of the most recent and powerful weapons by the Soviets, marched past the 38th parallel and into South Korea. They brought with them 150 huge, powerful Russian tanks. The South Koreans were completely surprised. It was a Saturday night, and many South Korean soldiers had gone to Japan for the weekend. Others had left their posts and had gone home. Those who were still guarding the border didn't have any weapons powerful enough to fight off the enormous Soviet tanks. Can I get Austin to read the next two little paragraphs there?
Where are we?
Oh,
Bro,
you don't know where we are? Are you following along?
kind of.
The North Korean soldiers.
Oh, okay. The North Korean soldiers trooped on southwards. When the United Nations learned of this invasion, its members agreed that soldiers should be sent in South Korea to help the South Koreans push the Soviet-trained North Koreans back. So British Commonwealth soldiers and American soldiers, under the command of the American General MacArthur, were sent back into Korea. They were given the job not just of driving the North Koreans out of South Korea, but of capturing North Korea and forcing it to rejoin the South.
Awesome, thank you. You can go ahead and mute yourself again. The British and American soldiers managed to push the communist forces back past the 38th parallel and then kept marching. They managed to march so far north that they were almost up to the Chinese-Korean border. At this, the Chinese grew worried about being invaded themselves. And that's a duplicate page. 200,000 Chinese soldiers marched south into Korea to push the UN forces back. Can I have Lily, can you read that next paragraph?
Yeah. Now, instead of helping Korea recover from occupation, 4 different countries, the US, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union and China, were fighting on Korean land. The Chinese pushed the South Korean and the UN forces back across the 38th parallel again. Then the UN sent in more troops and pushed back up to the 38th parallel once more.
Awesome. And Ice, if I can have you read starting the next paragraph. Ice. You should be unmuted now. Mic is broken. Okay. Back and forth. A North Korean soldier named Chung Dong-Kwai described an old woman who lived in a farmhouse near the 38th parallel, who cooked meals for the soldiers who came to her door. She seemed entirely unworried by the explosions and battles going on nearby. Living so close to the 30th parallel had caused her to see Northern and Southern soldiers take and retake her village many times, he wrote. She showed neither surprise nor fear over the fact of the latest changeover. By 1953, more than 3 million people had died in pointless fighting. Half of them were civilians who had not even been armed. Finally, after the death of Joseph Stalin, everyone agreed to a truce so that the Korean War would end. Korea would remain divided in two. The North would stay the People's Republic of Korea and would be a communist nation. The South would still be the Republic of Korea with an elected president. And the border between the two countries would be exactly where it had been placed at the end of World War II, almost 10 years before, right along the 38th parallel. All right, so end of World War II, 38th parallel. This is where we're gonna break up the country. And then after all of that fighting and a ton of death, they decide what? Oh, you know what? That was a pretty good idea we had. Let's just keep it there. So even after the back and forth and the support from outside nations, Korea remained divided in those two, the North with the communists and the South as a democracy. So tell me, what were some things that stood out to you from that chapter? Anybody?
I think the fight was like pointless. Like 3 million died for no reason.
Absolutely, yeah. 3 million people ended up giving their lives so that a arbitrarily drawn line could stay drawn there, is essentially what happened.
There's like no reason to do that. Like they could have just like kept it where it was before, could they?
Yes.
Or was some dictator who was planning to invade again? Who was the first invader?
The North Koreans invaded the South, and that was a surprise, right?
So
It was Saturday night. No one was expecting it. Kim Il-sung, and backed by the Russians, though, the Soviets. So they had the military support of Joseph Stalin, so they felt pretty good. They felt pretty confident, like, we're gonna steamroll them, we're gonna get in there, we're gonna take the land, we're all gonna be just one united Korea as a communist regime. And then South Korea was like, well, actually, we've got some friends too. We've got the United Nations, primarily the United States and Great Britain. They're going to be on our side, and we're going to push you back, and we're going to take you guys in the North, and you're going to be a democracy. And then it was that back and forth until finally they were like, we can't keep doing this. We just have to stop. So they reached a conclusion very similar to what they reached in India, where they were like, we tried to get along, it just doesn't work. That's it, we're gonna cut this thing up and be done with it. And in Vietnam, we've got the North and the South. Germany, we've got East and West. They put up a wall. They were like, that's it, we're done, no more. So unfortunately, post-World War II, it wasn't like this time of peace and prosperity. It was a time of more conflict and figuring out, now that we've got kind of the big winners of the war, what are all the rest of the countries going to do to kind of establish their place in geopolitics? And for me, the one like image that really stuck out was that woman who lived in the same exact location, like probably her same home. One day she lived in North Korea, the next morning she was in South Korea, the next day she's in North Korea again. She's not moving. It's the politics and the crazy conflict around her that is constantly shifting so that she never knows like what country she lives in. And she doesn't really have loyalty to either side because she sees both sides attacking and the explosions and the death and the conflict caused. So she's just kind of trying to lay low without pledging allegiance to one side or the other. Because what if one day she's like, okay, North Korea, I'm with you, this is great. And then the next day she's in South Korea. All of a sudden she's in enemy territory. So really, I mean, for her, probably staying neutral was the smart way to go. That's just kind of hard to imagine, waking up in a different country every day without ever moving.
That'd be weird.
Yeah, it'd be super weird. All right, you guys, we are going to do an outline of this chapter just to kind of help us break down into the main ideas that we want to keep. So if you guys have a notebook, Lily, I see your notebook, that's awesome. Some paper and a pen or a pencil would be fabulous. I would like you to take handwritten notes as opposed to typing them. You're obviously welcome to type them up later if you like kind of having things neat and orderly that way, but it is proven that taking notes with an actual writing utensil is better for you. You retain the information better. So please do that. Give everybody a minute to grab your writing stuff while I'm going to pull out our outline. All right, can everybody see our document here? Sweet. Okay, so before we jump into the outline, I just want us to notice, what font do I have here? What font am I using?
Times New Roman.
Times New Roman. Size?
12.
Yes, and I am double spaced. So right now you're writing with your hands, which is great, but I'm gonna tell you now, pretty much every essay, every writing assignment that you turn in, Times New Roman, 12-point font, double space, that is pretty standard across the board for academic writing. So just kind of get used to whenever you open up Microsoft Word or Google Doc, Times New Roman, 12-point font, double space, you'll be good to go. None of this like Comic Sans, size 16. Like if you turn in an essay that is like a funky font or size, like, oh, if I type in size 18, then, 4 pages goes by a lot faster. Don't do it. So this is just good practice for us to remember. So our first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna have the Roman numeral 1 to start off our outline. And our first topic, we're gonna be talking about North Korea. So we've got the North Korea's government. It's gonna be our first heading. And then for an outline, you're gonna go down and indent a little bit. So maybe like leave an inch on your page. And then a capital letter A is gonna be our next point. Make sure it's a capital, not lowercase. So North Korea's government, post-World War II, who comes in and helps set up this government? What country? Feel free to unmute yourself, otherwise throw it up in the chat.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Which country came in after World War II and helped to set up North Korea's government?
Oh. Soviets.
The Soviets, fabulous, by the Soviet Union, right? They were pretty happy to do so. They're like, hey, why don't you be communist with us? Yay. And so we're gonna do another indent under capital letter A. It's gonna be just the normal number 1. Who was the leader of the Soviet Union after the war?
Stalin.
Stalin, yes, so led by So today, we'll usually just refer to North Korea as North Korea. It's easier to say. But what is actually their official name?
People's Republic of North Korea.
You got it, yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
People's Republic of North Korea. And again, we're gonna go down, indent over number 1. What kind of government was this? What sort of
Communist.
political system were they operating under?
Communist.
Communism, yes. And then we're going to have point C next. Does anyone remember the name of the North Korean leader?
Kim Il-sung.
Yes. Kim Il-sung. So that's kind of our general sense of North Korea's government. Now we're going to head down south and talk about South Korea's government. Again, following the same pattern, we're on Roman numeral 2 now, but we're going to go down, indent over a bit in letter A. So in the north, we have the Soviet Union saying like, knock, knock, North Korea, hey, we'll help you out. We'll get you set up as our communist friend. Who was going to help set up South Korea's government? Any ideas?
The United States?
The United States, absolutely, but even more broad than that, we actually had the United Nations, so like Great Britain would have had a hand in that as well.
Okay. Sounds good.
So they're coming in, they're like, hey, this is our golden opportunity to make sure that Korea is a democracy and not following Stalin's lead and Mao's lead and Ho Chi Minh's lead and setting up a communist regime.
Yeah.
So this is where it gets a little confusing. South Korea, what is South Korea's like official name?
The Democratic Republic of South Korea?
Not quite, it's just gonna be the Republic of Korea.
Oh, okay.
So it's a little confusing because in the north we've got the People's Republic of North Korea, and in the south we have just the Republic of Korea. And this is a democracy. Does anyone remember from the reading who was the one who led the South Korean government?
Syngman Rhee.
Yeah. So this is the guy that it said he kind of like turned a blind eye, was like, oh, oops, looks like I'm not paying attention, when other people who were kind of vying for power were just conveniently assassinated. However, did that happen? What a shame. Oh well, right? So there was a lot of kind of political shadiness happening here so that the United Nations could put the guy that they wanted in power in South Korea. Again, the West meddling in Eastern affairs. Because where did this guy go to college? Does anyone remember?
Princeton.
Yeah, he went to Princeton. So if you haven't heard of Princeton, it's one of the Ivy League schools, very upper crusty, elite. So he was kind of in the royalty class, as it were, in the United States. So he had a lot of fans over here. So it makes sense that ultimately the job went to him because the United Nations and the United States were the ones kind of helping to get him into power. So we're going to have one more point here. We've kind of talked about North Korea, what was happening up there, South Korea, and now where things really start heating up is the North Korean invasion. So, North Korea invaded what?
South Korea?
You got it. South Korea. In June, do we remember what year? It was, I'll give you hopefully the answer, 5 years after World War II ended. Would put us in
1950.
1950. So kind of crazy that just 5 years after the biggest war in history, oh, look, it's another war. And I mean, honestly, 5 years is actually pretty good compared to Vietnam. That was 1 year when that conflict erupted in 1946. So at least these people got a little bit more of a breather. But 1950, North Korea is going to invade South Korea with the objective of uniting the country again under one ruler. North Korea was not alone, though. Who else was helping North Korea in their invasion?
Soviet Union.
Totally right, the Soviet Union. So they were armed by the Soviets, and they were supported by another country. What other country was like, yeah, communism, woo?
North Korea?
Yeah, so we've got North Korea. Yes, thank you, Hudson. China.
Oh, China.
And specifically, which leader in China would have been backing them?
Mao.
Mao, yeah. So that's the North Korean side. On the South, who is helping the South? So they get invaded and they're like, whoa, was not expecting that. Who can we call on to be like, okay, help us, democracy in crisis right now?
The United Nations?
Totally, yeah. So Great Britain and the United States, in this case represented by the United Nations as a whole. So the United Nations actually sent soldiers there to push North Korea back out of South Korea. So after all of this back and forth, here's the United States, here's Great Britain, and China is involved, and the Russians are involved. What do they finally decide to do at the very end? Well, you know, the line that we drew 5 years ago, that actually seemed like a great idea. Let's just stick with that. Do we remember where that line was?
38th parallel.
Yeah, the 38th parallel. Again, no really rhyme or reason for that. It was like, sure, right there. That looks good. Let's go with that. 38th parallel.
Miss Jasmine?
Yes.
Fiona's logging in. Would you mind admitting her?
I have not gotten that notification yet, and there it is. Yes.
Oh, she's not yet. Is she? Now she's logging in.
Yeah, she's in.
All right, thank you. Are you in? All right, cool. Thank you.
Yep. Right, so kind of they ended where they started, only now 3 million people have lost their lives in this conflict.
That's so pointless.
Yeah. It's pretty shocking to think about that there was that much turmoil and fighting to land us in a place that wasn't any better than where we started.
Could you scroll up, please, so I can see the whole thing? Thank you.
Yeah, and you'll probably have to get these notes later since we won't stay here for the rest of the class.
Okay.
I'll give you another minute there. So when we kind of boil it down, what was the Korean War ultimately about?
Stopping a dictator from taking over?
In some ways, yeah, if you're on the South Korean side, absolutely. It's like, hey, we do not want Kim Il-sung being our dictator, get out of here. But on an even more basic level, it's about communism versus democracy. And those two different political systems, those two different ideas going head to head. And we've seen that now in multiple different countries. This kind of the same story playing out in different contexts. In some contexts, the communism prevails. In others, the democracy prevails. And a lot of times, though, what is happening is neither side can really get the leg up. They're just so evenly matched that they decide, all right then, we're just going to split apart. You will, have communism over there, and we will have democracy over here. So it's a lot of just giving up on trying to get along and dividing. And these wars that were fought, 60 years ago, we are still living in the world that these wars created, right? Because South Korea, still a country. North Korea, still a country. Both still using these same political systems that were established way back in the years following World War II. So it may seem like, this happened so long ago, whatever. But no, I mean, we're still feeling the effects 100% today in very, very real ways. All right, I'm going to bring us back to the classroom. All right, so now I've been doing a lot of talking. I want to hear from you guys. What do you think could have been done instead of fighting this war? If we had really wanted to avoid this conflict that resulted in millions of deaths and ultimately took us from point A to point A, what do you think the United Nations could have done to maybe prevent something like this conflict?
I'd maybe try and negotiate it, like try and have a meeting between the countries and like work it out. Like, I don't know. If there's like a dictator who wants to take over, I think it's pretty hard to like find peace.
Honestly, I think you're right. It's like I would totally have the same thought at first, like, well, let's have some diplomacy here. Let's send representatives. Let's talk through this like rational people. But if you have someone that is so bent on attacking, who is so power hungry, then can you really have a conversation with them?
Yeah, it's like Hitler. It's like Hitler all over again. You know what I mean?
And we learned the hard way with Hitler, because Hitler, when he said, okay, I would like this, and it was like, Hitler, you're not supposed to do that. We agreed you wouldn't do that. And they're like, you know what? It's fine. It's just that one little thing. It's okay. And then he was like, oh, and I also want this. And while I'm at it, I'll have this and this. All of a sudden, he's grabbing more and more territory and power. And if you keep appeasing him, yeah, it's going to get out of hand. So it's better in a lot of ways, just nip it in the bud. And let's see, it's a controversy. Yeah, there's always going to be a power-hungry, greedy dictator around. And so having kind of systems of checks and balances, as it were, to keep everyone stable. In a lot of ways, it does seem inevitable that if people aren't going to be peace-loving and really intentionally seeking to have conversations to end conflict, then it's almost like, well, what else do we do but fight? And if the other side is the first one to pick up arms, like in this case, North Korea was like, knock, knock, here we come with our, Soviet tanks, then if you're South Korea, you don't have much choice but to defend your homeland and what you stand for. So from their perspective, it really looked like self-defense at first, and then they got more people on their side, and then just back and forth. And then you figure, well, we've come this far, we've got to keep going, right? We've got to make it worth it in the end. Yeah, sometimes it feels like there was nothing to stop it, like a war had to be fought until enough was enough. But getting to that enough is enough point can sometimes take a long time. In this case, it took the death of 3 million people for both sides to finally relent. Where else have we seen throughout history where maybe a war was fought and it was like, really? That's how it ended? Ugh, that doesn't seem like it was justifiable in any meaningful way. Any ideas? Any other conflicts that kind of seemed like could have been avoided or should have been avoided because the result did not give either side what they truly desired? And this is going to be kind of a preview. Vietnam, okay, yes, and the Vietnam War. So that's kind of a preview for what's coming up next week, is looking into the Vietnam War more. That is something that caused a lot of strife and division in the United States. There was a lot of people who vehemently opposed the war, and with good reason. It dragged on for a long time, and ultimately the United States did not come out of it looking like the good guy. At least with World War II, we're like, yeah, we defeated the Nazis, go us, we're so cool. Not exactly the case in Vietnam, a lot grayer moral areas, as well as the war on terror that has really been going on since 9/11. And that is, more recent history that maybe you even remember. There was a lot of division over, should we be in the Middle East? Should we not be in the Middle East? Okay, we're in the Middle East. Do we leave? Do we stay? How do we leave? What's the best practice? How do we do the least amount of harm at this point? Yeah, peace was definitely not a thing in the Korean War. So those are, just a couple examples from more recent history of wars that probably didn't end the way that the people who started them were hoping that they would end. And the war probably in Korea didn't end the way that Kim Il-sung wanted it to end. He wanted it to conclude with his triumphant rule over both halves of the country. All right, does anyone have any questions or comments? War and peace are opposites. Maybe we'll read War and Peace together. That would be pretty ambitious. All right, well, awesome job today, you guys. Thank you so much for participating and taking notes. That was fabulous. I hope you enjoyed it, learned something new, and I will see you all very soon. Bye.
See you guys.
See ya.